If you have a Bible and you like to follow along, please turn to Joshua chapter 1. This is where we will spend our time. I don't know how this works for you guys. I know how it works for me. I tend, when I look back on life, and it's not good, I don't like that feature of my thought life, but I tend to romanticize about the past. I look back on things and I think things in the past were so much better. There are things that I treasure about the past that are gone, just like the past. But I still hang on to them as things that were better than things are in the present in some way. And then the present puts me in a position to look ahead and think about the future as really, when I lived in Pennsylvania, this is the best picture of this I can give. If you've never been to rural Pennsylvania, this won't make a lot of sense to you because here it's so flat. Yeah. But in rural Pennsylvania, the state opted to take care of all the roads in the state. They're all maintained by the state, which is why when you come out of Pennsylvania and your car's going like this on the interstate and you hit Maryland, and all of a sudden you're just sliding along nice and smoothly because those are not maintained by the state. Each county has to maintain their roads. Well, in Pennsylvania, it's not the case. And these farm roads, which were literally just farm field roads between farms, have been paved. And I used to ride a mountain bike on these roads. And there were some roads where in the lowest gear I had on the bike, the hill was so steep that when I pushed on the pedal, the front wheel would come up off the ground. That's how steep it is. And at the top of the hill, there'd be a curve. You couldn't see anything. I remember thinking to myself, you know, if I were going more than 10 miles an hour when I come to that curve and something else is coming, there's going to be a head-on collision. There's nothing I can do. That picture of life is the way life looks to me. We're just moving along. I woke up yesterday planning to go with my wife to have a nice day on her birthday, which is actually today, but we were going to use Saturday as the day to celebrate it. And everything changed when she woke up. It was a blind curve. Nothing was expected. Our ships of life run up on reefs that we can't see, and we're flooded by them. This idea in the blind curve way of thinking, I remember the first trip I made to Maynard Community Baptist. I remember it very, very well. And I came off of 84 and made the right onto Jim Mixon as per the directions. No GPS. I mean, I didn't have it available to me on a flip phone. And I remember getting on Jim Mixon Road, and after a few minutes, I just thought, I've gone too far. There's no way this church is this far down this road, and nothing looked like anything that would open up into a field where a church might be. It's just nothing but trees and a house here and there. That's the way life. Only after I came down it several times did I become familiar enough that it didn't seem like I'd gone too far. I tell you, this being trapped in time and being stuck in the notion of everything in the future being a blind curve and everything in the past looking more friendly to me is a hard thing to get past. So think about those things as we look at this text in Joshua chapter 1. Joshua chapter 1. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 1. After Moses, the Lord's servant, died, the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, who was Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Get ready. Cross the Jordan River. Lead these people into the land which I am ready to hand over to them. I'm handing over to you every place you set your foot, just as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the wilderness in the south to Lebanon in the north. It will extend all the way to the great river Euphrates in the east, including all of Syria, and all the way to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. And no one will be able to resist you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not abandon you or leave you alone. Be strong and be brave. You must lead these people in the conquest of this land that I solemnly promised their ancestors that I would hand over to them. Make sure you're very strong and brave. Carefully obey all the law my servant Moses charged you to keep. Do not swerve from the right or to the left, that you'll then be successful in everything you do. The law scroll must never leave your lips or mind. You must memorize it day and night so that you can carefully obey all that is written in it. Then you will be prosperous and you will succeed. I repeat, be strong and brave. Don't be afraid. Don't panic. For I, the Lord your God, am with you in all that you do. So Joshua instructed the leaders of the people. Go through the camp and command the people. Prepare your supplies, for within 3 days you will cross the Jordan River and begin the conquest of the land the Lord your God is ready to hand over to you. Now, this is fascinating to me. It makes me think that perhaps Joshua doesn't know. God was Moses' undertaker, if you remember. God's the undertaker. Moses went out and God told him to go out and look over into the land, and then Moses was to die. And so Joshua may not even know at this point that Moses is dead. I don't know. However, this flat statement, Moses is dead, is one of those blind curves. I mean, think about all these people that are in Moses' charge, and now Moses is dead. This way ahead just must be like the most scary, ominous thing that they could possibly imagine themselves having to face. I mean, you've got people here, you've got elderly people, you've got young families with little children, some of them probably nursing at this point. Imagine the practical considerations of taking on this kind of trip for them. I can't imagine. I remember we were flying to the Bahamas once in a puddle jumper, you know, little 2-engine plane where seats about 10 people. That's how you get there. The Bahamian Islands, one of the Bahamian Islands that's underdeveloped, Eleuthera. Jets don't land there. And I remember looking at my son and looking out and seeing nothing but water and imagining if something happens to the plane. And I might have to watch my son eaten alive by sharks if we go down. I mean, that's the kind of thinking. And extrapolate to these people. They're fixing to just launch off into a land that they know is occupied by people that are not going to be happy to just give it up. That's why you see in the text in Numbers, why don't we just go back to Egypt? Right? It was hard, but it was known. We had food, we had shelter. Yeah, our lives were hard. We had to get up and be slaves every day, and we knew that our children would just grow up to be slaves, but we knew what to expect, and we knew that we could survive. I think one of the biggest single features in our culture today in this country is the tension between security and freedom. People would rather have the security than they would have the freedom. I don't think that's anything new. So I look at this in my own look back at everything in life. This is just the sad way my brain works. I think, what if it doesn't turn out right? I'm going to look back and regret the fact that I've taken this step toward whatever. Because what if this doesn't turn out? That's how I look at everything. And I hate that about myself. Have I walked away? Have I walked away from the better thing? I can promise you this, for the first 6 years we lived here in Waycross, in Warner County, that was the constant theme of my thinking 24/7. Have we walked away from the better thing? So here's Joshua, and for him this is all brand new and rather shocking, I would think. And yet for God sees the whole picture. For him, this change that we see is so scary is just part of the continuum. Change is all there is. That's all there is. There's no sense of things just staying the way they are at all, right? My wife thought that things would stay the way they were, and she woke up Saturday morning and couldn't go anywhere. So this idea here is one that really doesn't fit anything that I would look at and say that looks comfortable to me. If we really stop and think about what life is, the one word you can't put to it is comfortable, I don't think. Now, Joshua is now going to be the leader. He was once the assistant. Now he's being set apart as the leader, the commander. Why is that? What makes Joshua a good commander? Well, that's very easy to understand. He's been a good obeyer. From the day one, he obeyed Moses. When they sent the spies in, he and Caleb came back and said, let's go. It's our land. God's giving it to us. And then, of course, the other 10 spies said, no, we can't go over there. And the people aligned themselves with them, and they wound up walking through the desert for 40 years for no purpose whatsoever other than to be taught and to have that first generation die out and be replaced. So Aristotle said it well. He said, the one who has not learned to obey cannot be a good commander. I was talking to a friend of mine this past week. It's so interesting to me. I love it when things come in like this. And he was explaining to me the fact of how this particular company works that he's familiar with. It was Jim. I think it was Jim. I hope I'm right about that now that I've said that. He said that there's a company policy where, you know what HR is, right? Human resources. That's what's used to be called the hiring and firing people. Now it's called human resources. And there are people who go to college to get degrees in human resources. And the companies, the big companies now have a whole department, most of them called human resources, and they hire these college graduates to come and fill the management positions in human resources. I have a good friend who works in that. Well, this one company doesn't do it that way. Yeah, they'll hire you out of college. Your first day on the job, you go down to the first station on the factory floor and you spend a long time there. There's a 6-month process where you will work every position on that factory floor before you were ever placed into management.
Should be like that.
It just sounds like a great idea to me. What's the meaning? You can't be a commander until you've learned how to obey. You've got to know what it's like to be down there before you can be up there. And that's why Joshua was chosen. He had obeyed. He'd been Moses' assistant for all that time. Now, Joshua was commissioned for 3 things in this text, if you read it carefully. Lead the people into the land that God's given to them. Defeat the enemies that they're going to encounter, right? And then claim the land and divide it as God has given it. That's what Joshua was commissioned to do. The thing that fascinates me about this text is God could have done all this without Joshua, every bit of it. Didn't need him. This is not an army. These are just civilians. So, what could God have done? Well, it seems to me that given the fact that God created the heavens and earth and then flooded the earth, he could they crossed the Red Sea, right? And what was the water doing? Standing on either side of them like a wall while they crossed on dry land. Okay, so God could flood the Levant. He could take all those borders that he gave, Syria and Euphrates and all the rest, the Mediterranean Sea. He could border off that area and put it under 50 feet of water for a month. Right? He could do that. No problem. And then the land would be swept clean of everything, and you just come on in and divide it up, and everything goes as it should, and everybody's happy. He doesn't need Joshua to do this at all. But he chose to use people to do this. I love the Chronicles of Narnia. If you've never read them, I encourage you to get your copies and read them. It's just so beautiful the way Lewis talks about the fact of God working with human beings via those books. In every instance, the children who wind up in Narnia are committed to doing certain tasks, none of which Aslan couldn't accomplish by himself. He doesn't need them, but he uses them. It's just a fascinating commentary on it. And this has got to just be the most frightening set of circumstances these people could possibly be put into. Well, that speaks to me. It speaks to me the fact that change is just really hard for us. But change is all there is, really. I mean, the earth is turning, time is going on. Every day we wake up, something maybe hurts that didn't hurt yesterday. But then, in the midst of it, even when things are going well, we're unhappy in that. In other words, things can be going willy-nilly and a lot of changes. We don't like that. But then when things aren't going willy-nilly and there aren't changes, we don't like that either. The people they have every need met. We talked about it, Brad and I did this morning. Every need met in the manna. Their sandals didn't wear out for the entirety of the 40-year wandering. None of their children just died from starvation. They didn't lack water. Everything was supplied to them, and yet they complained. We're tired of this manna. Can we have some meat? God says, all right, well, have it your way. I'll give you some meat. I'll give it to you so much that you'll be sick of that too. Sure enough, the quail got to where they had so many and they got so tired of that they couldn't stand it. The mundane sameness didn't satisfy. The new thing didn't satisfy. We complain about everything. That's just who we are. Right now, here's the example that just flooded me this week. We complain about our political environment right now. All of us do. And let's face it, if our guy had won, the others who don't like our guy, they would be complaining about the political environment in the same way that we are.
Yeah.
Stop for a minute and let's just sober up for just a second and ask ourselves some questions. How many of us came in here today hungry? I don't mean hungry like when's lunch. I mean hungry like I haven't eaten for 3 days. How many of us came in here like that? How many of us came in here freezing to death because of inadequate clothing? How many of us walked because we had no other means to transport to get here? I'd say none. What are we complaining about that's real? What are we complaining about that's real? Did you know, I saw an article many years ago and I just thought, gosh, this fits here so well. The deaf community. I used to live in Maryland and there's a huge school for the deaf in Maryland. I can't think of the name of it offhand. I wish I'd looked it up. There was a group of the deaf back in the 80s when cochlear implants were brand new. I mean, think about the miracle of that. Put a device on your head with electrodes going to your hearing center and a microphone that feeds information from the implant to your brain, replacing the problem in your ear. And that people that were formerly deaf now were hearing, and some people in the deaf community called that a genocide because you're eliminating the deafness. They did. Think about the Shakers, right? The Shakers. You know what was said of Shaker furniture during the time of the Shakers? They made chairs fit for angels to sit in. That's what they used to say about Shaker furniture. Why? Because it was such quality that that's how it was viewed. And the Shakers, because of their Puritan background, felt that that's how they should make everything. If you sewed a quilt, it should be a quilt fit for an angel to use. Where are the Shakers now? Their history. This idea that things can remain the same and that we can romantically look back is just false. And it's a trap. It's a trap I live with every day. I'll just confess that. It's a problem for me. But what's the common denominator here in all of this? Fallen people who live in time. That's the common denominator. And each life that's lived, each one of our lives in this room is a life that will never be lived again, just as this one is lived. So when we think about change and we look at it as unsettling, there's a God in heaven who doesn't change at all. Yet he knows there's change. So how is it then that God can fit into that total structure of either the problem of the romance of the past or the blind curves of change? Well, Isaiah says the nations are a drop in the bucket. Isaiah says the grass withers, but the word of God remains forever. You see, for us, in all of this change, there's not a place we can go to eliminate it, to avoid it, but there's a person to whom we can come, a person who, I mean, think about God in the sense, what is it that draws us out to seek God in the midst of the unsettling change? I would say for me, this just may be me, it's that God's the perfect listener. I can bring to him anything that's on my mind, and he's never going to turn me away. And you know, God's a better listener than any of us. What do we do when we listen? Right? Some of us formulate what we're going to say next as we're listening to the person talk. We're not really listening. We're planning the next sentence. Some people we're distracted. How many people have you sat with and talked to who are constantly looking away because something moves in their field of sight? You know, you're really talking about, it's frustrating if you're talking to somebody that really means something to you. You're talking about something that really is serious to you. And the person to whom you're giving the report is constantly looking over here at other things. It's like, what am I doing here wasting my time talking to you? God doesn't do that. If I speak to God, I've got his full attention. Full attention. Think about that. Or how many of you would go visit a counselor who kept their phone in their pocket? I got a friend, and we meet, and every minute or two, somebody just pinged in, give me a second. The whole time for an hour, I'm thinking, do you mean to tell me there's not 1 hour that you could just be with somebody in front of you? Not one? Or I've got this customer who finishes all my sentences for me. It's the most frustrating person I know that I can speak with. He asks me a question. It's a he, so I've eliminated 50% of the human population. But he asks me a question, and before I can even begin very well, he's answering it for me. I'm thinking, why am I even bothering to talk? Why did you ask me the question? Or, here's the worst one because you can't tell. You're talking to somebody, and they're looking at you, but you have this funny feeling in your mind. The lights are on, but nobody's home. They've checked out. They're thinking about something entirely different. They're not listening to anything you're saying. The beauty of knowing God is he never does any of that. If I call on God's name, I've got God's attention. So have you. It's God's grace that allows him to listen without condemnation or any judgment whatsoever. And I'll tell you, for the Christian, for the follower of Jesus, all these big questions about the past and the future are answered for us. We may not think that consciously, but they are. So what are the questions? Well, what will life be like in 10 years? I don't know. God's probably got a pretty good window on that. Am I straining to find some kind of meaning in my life? Have I made a mistake? Have I taken the wrong path? Maybe. But I can bring that to the Lord, and the Lord will work with me in that. Does getting older seem scary? Think about Janelle. Think about Kevin. Does it frighten us? I think we can talk to God about that. Jesus said, I'm the resurrection and the life. If any person comes to me and dies, they'll live. Do you believe that, Martha? Do you believe that, Rip? Yeah, I believe it. And this is the beauty of God. If you bring whatever we bring to him, this is why when he talks to Joshua this way, you can see that Joshua understands God to be just this kind of listener. There's no question in his mind. Way back 40 years ago, let's go, we can take the land. God says he's given it to us. God never, ever, if a person reaches out to God, I don't care who they are, Saddam Hussein, if Saddam had reached out to God and really asked for God's attention, God will never look at you or me and fold his arms up and say, I'm offended. Come back later. God doesn't do that. Jesus paid the price so that you and I can have the fullest confidence that God is always available to listen to us. So we can go into uncertainty. The future's uncertainty. I don't care what anybody says. But the uncertain future, because of God, is more certain than anything else we can know. In the end, it belongs to him. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything, you've got a question for me, or pray with me, I'll stay here as long as it